Hey everyone, this is Jack Mangan. This Slam Summit covers band Infighting and features David Ellefson and Burton C as panelists. Some topics and quotes from this panel. The secrets behind some of James Brown's dance moves. When it ends, you move on, you don't fight your way out the door. That was the beginning of the divide and conquer moment in Megadeth. Wait, there's rules? Keep watching to see who said it and what they meant. All right. Sign your name across my heart. What's up, everyone? This is Jack Mangan of Support Life in Music. You also know me through the Metal Hall of Fame, metalasylum.net. I did the Am I Evil graphic novel, but enough about me. Today, let's talk about the series, the Support Life in Music. Our mission is to help musicians and everyone in the music community against the suicide, self-destruction, substance abuse, all the ways that our people are hurting. If you're in a bad spot right now, do not hesitate. Call 988. If you need some resources, Jack at supportlifeinmusic.org, and I will do my best to help you. I'm not a qualified therapist, but I can help redirect you. But so that's that for Support Life in Music. But our guest today, now this is a panel. Holy shit, this is great. Thank you so much. David Ellefson, formerly of Megadeth, also of too many bands now. I can't name them all, Dave. Kings of Thrash, Dieth, and you got a bunch of other projects coming on. We've talked before, but thank you so much for coming to talk to Slam today, because this is this is a big deal. Thank you.
Welcome.
And then another person who's been on an album that is huge in my life, Burton C, formerly of Fear Factory, Ascension of the Watchers, Geezer, and now solo.
City of Fire.
Yes.
Been involved with ministry, and many other guest spots that you might have seen me on over the years. I'm like the Troy McClure of metal.
Yes, and ministry. Yeah, I can't forget your spot with ministry, man. Yes, what a career, and like I said, both of you guys. So, I'm a super fan, so I really appreciate you guys being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our topic of the day is, there are band fights sometimes. There are sometimes difficult relationships in bands. So let me start with a story. I'm going to take the heat off of you guys for a minute and talk about, I don't know if you guys have heard about James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. He used to do all these dance moves on stage, but it came out, years later. Bootsy Collins and some of the other guys in the James Brown band pointed out some of his dance moves would actually be, if he got pissed off at a band member or if he thought that they were out of time, whatever, he would and part of his move, he would point at them. And if he pointed at you with his hand out like that, that meant he was docking your pay $5. And if you did like that, so he would do these dance moves, and people thought, oh, it's just James doing his cool dances. But no, he was actually being a tyrant to his band right there in the concert. So it's just unbelievable. I can't imagine working. That's when you talk about a hostile work environment.
Well, it's pretty awesome in a way where he's integrating his discipline into his band with his dance moves. That takes a certain amount of artistry, I think.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. But I mean, that's this seems like this is really prevalent across the whole industry. I mean, I know you guys have your own stories to tell, but I mean, have you seen a lot of this? You've toured with all kinds of bands and been backstage and been privy to stuff. Is this a real problem in the world with band relationships turning toxic?
I think the first thing is it's music business, not music friends. And the reality of it is it's a job like any other. You have to suit up, show up, sometimes shut up. The main thing is whether you're starting a band or you're walking into a recording session or you've been hired to do a tour or play on a date. Who's the boss? Where does the power lie? I think that's the first thing. Find out where the power lies, and that is the person who is probably your boss. Just like when you walk into an office, everybody has a boss, and that person probably has a boss too, so as the old adage goes, crap rolls downhill. So, the boss of the band may be under some pressure from a record company, from an agent, from the promoter, so someone's got a boss above them all the way to the top. So don't take it personally. I'd find if you're prepared, know your parts, dress the part, don't wear white to a death metal gig, don't bring your Don't bring your 6-string fretless to the bar mitzvah and, you know, church gig, or, you know what I mean? So like be appropriate, you know? Yeah. You know, bring the right gear, bring the right clothes, bring the right attitude to the gig. Learn as much as you can about the gig. And look, we all are in gigs for a reason, right? Either we want the money, we need the money, we like the songs, we like the people, and or any combination thereof. And along the way, we may go, you know what, I love the songs, but I don't like these people, or I don't like that person, you know. And how long can you deal with that? Again, it's a job like any other, just like driving a gravel truck, just like being a waitress. And you know, it's lonely at the top. You know, the guy who's the boss, the James Brown, and, you know, just to use an example that you brought up, you know, he's got a lot of pressure on him, and he was probably using pickup musicians. That wasn't a band that he'd grown up with, that he'd formed in the garage, and they got a record deal and went to the top together. It was probably a bunch of musicians that he got along the way. And, you know, to another example, you know, Don Menza, Nick Menza's dad, he just told me a story because a couple of weeks ago he played in Buddy Rich's band. And there's this famous tape that's floating around about Buddy Rich chewing out his band on the tour bus. And I said, were you there? He goes, oh yeah, I was there. You know, because he used to not only be first chair tenor sax in Don's band, but he always used to write material for him and write and arrange for him. And it was Buddy's name on the door. It's his band. You do it his way. And those were local pickup musicians or pickup musicians that he'd get for a tour. And he'd read them the riot act. He put them in place. It's like, this is the frickin' marching orders, you know? And it was kind of, he said it was sort of half serious, because if you didn't drop the gauntlet on day one and let everybody know, I'm the boss, this is how it goes, no messing around, you know, you gotta run the hen house, man. You know what I mean? Someone's got to be the boss. So, you know, you hear about these old school guys like that, the James Browns, the Buddy Riches and all that. And I was in a band like that, you know, when I met Dave, he made it very clear he's going to run the band, you know, and you could challenge that, but, you know, there's the door. And so to the degree that I was Minnesota nice, and by maybe bass players by nature tend to be this kind of middle ground person. I think it's a personality type as well. You know, I you know, am the longest surviving member of that group other than him, you know? So, and yet at the same time, I got the vision, I got on board with it. And, you know, we had a mission statement and we followed the mission, and that's how we did it, you know, and we tried a lot of different things, but, you know, you do it for as long as you can. And when it ends, you move on, and you don't fight your way out the door. You just move on and get on to the next thing. So there's my story. That's my piece.
That's a good story. And I'm glad you started off the way you did with, it's not a friendship, it's a business. Because as soon as, even if you're not signed and you go out and the band gets together and they go out and play their first show and they get paid their $20, even though it's $20, you're automatically a business because you're making money. And once you make that money, you got to start making more, and you get that need to make more because you want the band to succeed. Now, there's a flip side to what you were saying, David, about there's always a boss. I agree. There's a lot of bands that are like that. However, there's bands that start off as a democracy, and in that democracy, there's always agreements and disagreements. There's visions can collide, visions can scrape against each other. Sometimes visions come together. However, it's not a well-oiled machine as most people would like to think. And what happens behind the scenes, you know, in the making of an album or artwork or touring, there's, you know, what people see is only the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more that goes on. The interrelationships of each band member. It's almost like a old time Greek Senate where people are talking to each other, and they're having to almost go to each other and like make pacts with each, like, different members of every band. And so like we have to unite with each other to make something happen. And sometimes people just don't want to listen, but you know, within that group of democracy, there's always friction, and everyone has a different personality. And at some point, it's not just a friendship, but you're like, when you sign a record contract, you're like married to them. So a
Yeah.
marriage can be tumultuous as
So let me ask you this, Burton. Is there really ever a democracy? Because, I was talking to Mike Portnoy about this. He goes, dude, bands are never a democracy. You always need a leader. Now, of course, he was the leader of Dream Theater for many years, but we had this, it was a conversation that we had. And I say it because I've been in Democratic bands as well. And I think always there's some sort of alpha personality that rises to the top. For no other
that's
reason,
true.
If for no other reason, someone has to grab onto the reins and be the sort of point, the decision point. And I go to these Van Halen books that I've been reading, and I got to meet Michael Anthony years ago at NAMM and become friends with him. And I always felt bad for him because, those guys were really shitty to him. They started out as a democracy. It sounds like it was a 4-way. And then all of a sudden, it's at some point, the 1984 album or some peak of their career, they went, he's not doing enough. We're going to take his money away, and then these are very public things now that are posted in their books. It's, and I look at that and I go, well, it was decided at one point, Eddie was, as Alex said, when Eddie walked in the door with Running with the Devil, it was decided you're the guy writing the songs. That's what you do, right? Because everybody has a core competency, right? You're writing the tunes. I guess Alex, the brother, was kind of maybe the business head. David Lee Roth, seemed to have kind of the showbiz vision. Michael Anthony, like, we need a guy to just kind of say yes and go along and be there. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as that guy jumps in and goes, well, wait a minute, I got an opinion on that. It's like, you're going to be fired or ousted anyway, right? So
okay,
right. So let's go to that.
There's the dynamic of a supposed democracy, and there's always going to be like an intolerable tyrant taking the reins. However, I feel if there's not transparency about what's going on with this person that is taking the lead, then everyone else is left in the dark, and that in itself creates animosity. And if you're going to take the reins, fine, but be transparent, be honest with everyone, let everyone know exactly what you're doing. Don't hide behind lies, and don't hide behind a manager and try and make everything their fault, or
sure, the scapegoat. Can we use the word oligarchy, or is that politically incorrect right
now?
No,
oligarch. No, that's not. An oligarch is that's a good term.
It fits.
Only if the people have money. That's another thing.
Of course.
But a tyrant. A tyrant still works.
I watch the news and I'm like, all of these numbskulls in Washington, D.C., this is just like being in a rock band, right? I mean, it's this. I always say everything I learned, there's this book, Everything I Needed to Know in Life, I learned in kindergarten. Hold hands, please, and thank you. Look both ways at the street corner. And I always say everything I needed to learn in life, I learned in a rock band, because I've been in rock band since I was 12 years old, and I've seen pretty much all of it, done almost all of it, every version of it, 3-piece, 4-piece, 5-piece, whatever.
2-way, 3-way.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And so it's funny how you kind of see every version of this, all-star groups, solo groups, all the different flavors and versions of this thing, and it's interesting, we, Burton, you and I, we've been in it for a minute, and we've had our successes, and we've had our struggles as well, and,
absolutely.
Because that's also part of success, having a trial, having a setback, having the winds of change. That's all part of being a career artist, a career musician.
Peaks and valleys.
It's not always an uptrend. We surviving all the rest of it.
What goes up must come down.
And then maybe we can somehow try to get that kite to soar again. You know what I mean? I mean,
it's possible. It is possible, but it does take a lot of work. But yes, we have been through all of that. And I think, going back to dealing with band members and personalities, that is something you grow. It's something you learn as you grow with these people. Mm-hmm. And as you said, you started when you were just not even a teenager. Mm-hmm. That, being on the road, dealing with these people, this is how you learn about life. And it's in some ways it's the most important relationships you'll ever have at some point in your life. Yes, there'll be other important relationships when it comes to working. This is how you learn how you want to do things or how you not want to do things.
Right. Plus,
Right.
also, maybe the topic should be how to be a good roommate, because basically, there's, like you said, when you sign the record contract, it's like a marriage contract, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have children called songs and albums and intellectual property that will probably survive us. It'll probably outlive us. These songs we created, this music, this sort of culture that we're a part of creating. But at the same time, in that moment, you're dealing with kind of in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, until the death of us do us part, But the other thing is also, excuse me, about just how to be a roommate, how to be not just on stage together. There was a period in the 90s when I just went, and the 90s were a good decade for me career-wise, but toward the end of the 90s, there was a lot of transitions, new managers coming in, divide and conquer. I literally had a manager sit in my living room one day and say, Dave is Bruce Springsteen. You guys are just the E Street Band. And I was like, my wife is ready to throw a fucking frying pan at his head. Is like, get the fuck out of my house. The guy who'd been there for like a year, comes in and says that. Talk about, and that really was the beginning of the divide and conquer of Megadeth. It really was. That was a dividing moment that we didn't survive it, and we never came back from it. You know what I mean? And all it takes is sometimes an outside ear to come in and start chirping, an outside voice to come in and start chirping in the right ear. And that sometimes those are unsurvivable equations that are hard to come back from. And our band, that was on the Risk album. So there it is. That album, that was just, we're going into the Risk album. So let that be, this isn't a feeling. This is a fact. This is of what happened from that leadership regime.
Yeah, everyone has motives, whether they're positive or negative.
Yeah.
Right. It's hard enough, right? When you have in a marriage, it's hard enough if you got two people, but then if you have outside really strong influences, we've seen a lot of relationships just fall apart. But what I want to ask you guys about, and this applies to marriages, to friendships, to work, to like office jobs. I've left office jobs because of abusive commentary and behavior. So at what point, I agree 100%, like show up for work, like don't just be a slacker and be like, oh, they're also mean to me here. But when it gets abusive, you got to leave, or you got to take action to fix. It's got to be fixed either by you leaving or by fixing it. So when it turns abusive, that's when, and I'm not Dave, if you're watching, I'm not talking shit about you or anybody, but if it when it turns abusive, what do you do then?
Well, look, I think when you walk into any room, any situation, you kind of, if you're honest with yourself, what you're walking into. You get if your bullshit detectors are up, this could be a problem. Oh, that was an off-color comment. I saw something go down that I don't think was, so cool. And, we can sweep it under the rug. We can pretend, well, maybe it didn't happen, or maybe this will get better over time. I'm here to tell you, it won't. Okay, so if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, I promise you it's a duck. So if you see that happening early on, because our personalities, especially by the time we're starting musical ventures and artistic ventures, let's assume we're adults, right? We've been on the planet for a few years, and who we are generally tends to come out, and so these personality types, whether you're reserved, passive aggressive, super aggressive, abusive, whatever it may be, if you see the very tip of that iceberg, just assume that there's an iceberg down below the surface. And I think, look, how do you deal with it? Well, look, I've been, in a past band, we had a drug and alcohol counselor come in to help us learn how to talk to each other as we were getting sober. Metallica made a movie about this stuff. I know another
some
pretty
kind
famous
of monster.
pretty famous band that they do check-ins, 30 minutes before they go on stage. They check in what's going on in their personal lives, their professional life. Is there anything we need to work on the show? And then they come off stage and they sort of debrief. So there's sort of like a briefing before you go on stage to go into the mission, and then there's a debriefing after the mission. So there's and these are these are healthy groups, that because what we realize, things don't stay the same. People are allowed to change, they're allowed to grow, and I think that's one of the hardest things when you're in a career group, for instance, is, we change, right? People grow up, they change their lifestyle. Maybe they get married, they have children. Now you're on the road. There's all these different. We're growing as people too. And,
Right.
and that's not so. It isn't like we just walk into it and this is who we are forever. There's a lot of changes that happen, and the more we can support each other and be supportive to each other, I have found the better chances of success. Again, as much as again, my past group had a very publicly kind of tumultuous reputation. I will say we also took the time, especially during the 90s, where we really took the time and and not that manager I spoke about before, but the ones before him, where we really took the time to try to heal each other, and give each other the space, whether it was sobriety, whether it was, things at home that we were dealing with. We took the time to really be supportive for each other. And I think that's why we had such a great career during that decade.
Well, and that's the basis of a healthy relationship is communication. You have to communicate. You have to be transparent. You have to be honest with each other, including yourself. More importantly, yourself, and and recognizing intricacies and peccadillos about certain people's personalities is something that we all can do, and having the ability to recognize it and to confront it and learn how to deal with it is part of growing as a band. But some people just get worse and worse. They never change. You are who you are when you're born, and then you just become that person even more so as you grow older. A friend of mine said more money makes you even more who you are already. But I was like, well, maybe just getting older makes you more who you are.
Yeah. I mean, we are who we are. Add fame, add money, add, all those things, while those are not necessarily evil in and of themselves, those things put into someone who, and it's happened to me too, in my early years, drugs and alcohol and success and all this sort of stuff. And at a time in our business when this stuff was kind of celebrated, as they said, if you remember the 80s, you weren't there, so, there was a lot of that, but, I think also too, there's another thing too, and that's the creative side, right? Which is, who is sort of the creative force of the group? Is it the whole group? Does the band get in a room together and write? Does one or two people, are they sort of the creative force? I read these, Geddy Lee's book, and he talks about how early on they just decided, I think it was by album 2 or 3, they just decided, let's just split everything equal. No matter who wrote it, let's split it equal. And that just took that money discussion off the table. And I've been in groups like that where that always works the best. Now, look, it always works the best on the first album, right? Because everybody's trying to bring it together. And then sometimes by albums 2 and 3, you go, I'm doing more work than him, or somebody says, I'm doing more work than you, these kind of things, so money is a hot button topic in a creative world. And
absolutely,
so all of a sudden money comes in, some publishing, songwriting, and certainly if someone, maybe their role isn't the writer, and someone else has this talent to write, it's by that person's talent that all of it is happening, right? That suddenly the band is rising, the merchandise is selling, you're performing to more people, the records are selling. So I think having those discussions up front about, hey, how are we splitting the money here? It's an uncomfortable conversation. I think it's for sure an important one. When the check shows up, that's not the time to be talking about how we're splitting the money. No. Having that discussion up front, because it will tell you before even one, like Burton said, as soon as you make $1, you're in the music business, because your commerce has changed hands.
That's right.
So have that discussion before the money shows up, because I'm telling you, in that discussion, you will be able to tell very clearly who is going to behave in a certain way. Whether it's $10 that showed up or $10 million that showed up, they will behave the same, because it's all about their behavior at that time, and even how you behave, right? I mean, because you can't control always what other people are going to do. How do I look at that? What is that in my life? So I think that's an important, discussion to have right up front as well.
Do you guys
Absolutely.
advocate for something like that in a contract, even for teenagers playing their first gig down at the corner? Or do you think that that's too formal, like having it in writing?
Uh, it really depends on the seriousness and the goal of each band member, honestly. That's a conversation you should have before you even decide to have a contract. I think that, you know, if your teenagers just having fun in the
Yeah,
at
I
the
would agree.
community hall or something like that, you know, that's, you don't need a contract. You just need to have some fun. But if your goal is to like, I want to be a rock star, you know, I want to go out and play, I want to tour, that kind of stuff, then you need to have that conversation. But if your goal is just to play backyard gigs, then you don't really need it.
Now
Yeah,
that
all
brings
right.
up another story. Backyard gigs with a keg party. All right, why does my guitar player get so drunk all the time? You know, it used to happen to me growing up on the farm in Minnesota. We'd get invited to go play. In fact, we had a sound man. The drinking gauge was 19, so we had a sound man who was 19, so he could walk us into the bars and we could play. And he was essentially our guardian. You know, he'd kind of have to sign off on taking care of us, you know, and, you know, look, we're a young rock band, man, you know, we're listening to Venom and Iron Maiden. I mean, we're not a bunch of squares, you know what I mean? Like we're wanting to be rock stars. Right. So, but you know, all of a sudden the singer would smoke pot, forget the words, you know, the guitar player would get too drunk and chase girls and never put his amp away and pack his shit up. And just like, you know, so you see this behavior very early on, you know, and, you know, the truth of it is, you know, to your point, how do you deal with this? You know, here's the other option. You can always leave. You know, no one's putting a gun to your head saying you have to do this. I mean, that's the
That's
thing.
true.
Sometimes the sane person goes, you know, it's a cool gig, but there's just as much downside to this. I'm out, you know. And sometimes the worst things that can happen is the golden handcuffs, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm famous, I'm making a bunch of money, my mortgage, my identity, all this stuff, it relies on what I'm doing. Those are the harder gigs to walk away from, to be honest with you, because who's going to want to leave it, you know? And sometimes you've got a lot of time invested in something, you know, you've got a lot of time, and you do the best you can to try to make things work with people. And let me say, thirdly, sometimes it's the dysfunction, it's the craziness and the chaos that makes it great. And
Sometimes.
I'll go back to Appetite for Destruction, Guns N' Roses. I mean, this band, you could just see looking at them like these guys are trouble, man. But you listen to that record, you're like, this is fucking brilliant. Like this is the best record of the decade, you know? And that is part of what happens. Creative tension, we call it. And it sounds like a nice flowery word until you're in the room experiencing it. But sometimes, you know, that when you take it to the stage, that explosion of energy and personality, it just works, man. And
Yeah.
that's what people pay for. They don't pay for ordinary, they pay for extraordinary. You know, they want to see a circus, man.
They want to see a show.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess I see your point, but I mean that's awful to go through. I mean, I just imagine being in that band with Axel. Sure, it would have been fun, all the attention and fame and money and adulation, but man, the crash. I mean, right? It was that. I mean, again, you know, you guys have seen it and you've been in it. Like the crash is really hard, isn't it? I mean, I'm putting the question out there. Like is it worth it to go that high and then have that steep of a crash?
Absolutely, it's worth it, because if you never tried, you never would have been there. So at least having the ability to fail is what we have, is what life is all about. We prove ourselves by getting up again, and if you're able to remove yourself from that disaster and move forward, then you're growing as a human being, as an artist in general. So yeah, you cannot have success without having devastating failure, because it's going to happen. It happens to pretty much every artist you can think of. You know, in some way or another, they've had some catastrophe in their life that just, you know, crushes them. And it might not even be band related. It might be completely personal, but it's all due because of what they have chosen to do in their life. And, you know, I've chosen to be a musician and artist a long time ago. And no matter what happens, I will continue to be that no matter what iteration I am a part of. So I will continue. I'm not going to let failure, I'm not going to let disaster dictate my life. And that's, I think, you know, you mentioned something, you know, this is like suicide awareness.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. And I've been, I've been an advocate for this festival called Cold Waves, which is started out, still is suicide awareness and supports suicide prevention sources that I feel that, you know, as an artist and as human beings, we, of course, we're sensitive and we have that idea and that feeling like, fuck, I can't take any more of this shit. You know, it's like, any more bad news, I just can't take it anymore. And it's, you get to a point where like, you know, we all think about it, but it's that step of like, it's not worth it, you know, and having the ability to talk to someone about it, communication. It's like, you got to be able to be open with someone and your feelings to understand that what you're feeling is normal, what you're experiencing is normal. I mean, it doesn't happen to everybody, but it does happen to a good significant amount of people. But
Yeah.
so I feel that communication, I cannot iterate enough that communication transparency is probably the key two elements that you need to have in a band to work with other people and to survive and to continue doing what you wish to do.
You know, it makes me think, if you're going to play sports, right, and play football, your job for some of the people on the team is to run as hard and fast at that guy as you can and hurt him and take him down. And if not hurt him, at least knock him down, right? That's your job. You're employed to basically create a car crash like every 30 seconds with every play you do, right?
Yep.
You don't want to do that, don't be on the field. That's your job. You know, same with us as artists, right? The first thing is to create the music, create the experience, right? And that can happen sometimes in solace. It can happen, you know, again, you got your whole life to write your first record and about 9 months to write your second one, you know,
Pretty much.
and the expectations are the same, right? And you've had a whole life to kind of create these experiences, this emotional creation that you put into your record, to your songs. And then again, you're trying to kind of hurry up and do that again in say 9 months, 12 months, you know, for your second one.
It's incredible.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So the expectations, because now there's usually a contract involved from a label and management stuff, and the cycle. Now you're on a treadmill. You're on an assembly line, you know, to start cranking this stuff out. And you know, it hit me, Bert, as you were talking. You know, it's the old adage. You know, do addicts get into the music business, or does the music business create addicts? And you know, it's probably a little of both. You know,
I would agree.
I look back at my life. You know, I didn't start out as that, but what kid gets in his van from the farm and drives west to Hollywood, you know, not knowing anybody, and says, I'm jumping in the deep end. You know what I mean? And I remember walking down Hollywood Boulevard going, oh shit, here I am. I'm not going home. I'm not going to go home to be a farmer. This is it, you know.
Oh, we kind of did the same. You and I kind of did the same thing. I moved across country to LA. You know, didn't know a damn soul, and I was like, well, if you're gonna do it, you got to jump in.
This is it. You're jumping in the deep end with a bunch. My dad used to say that your business is nothing but a bunch of shysters and con men. I said, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much what, you know, it's Barnum and Bailey, man. And you know, you
like
watch the
forever.
Elvis movie, you know, about Colonel Tom Parker, you know, and yet at the end of the day, it's like Elvis wouldn't have been Elvis without him, you know. And
that's true.
There are partnerships that happen because of this. And you know, it's funny, I was talking to your mental health thing. You know, I was at a venue backstage in England when we were over there with Kings of Thrash in October. And I saw the sign, you know, if you're feeling suicidal, or if you have any thoughts of, you know, mental illness and this stuff. And what hit me was, back in the old days, we just did drugs. You know, that's what it was, right? You just do drugs. You just sex, drugs, rock and roll. That's what it was. And not saying that that's the cure for that, but it's so funny how times have changed, because in a different day, snort this, drink this, smoke this. Like that was just what we did, right? That's how we dealt with mental illness, right? Is because we were,
That's
if
right.
you weren't an addict, you were certainly tripping on something, and here, smoke or pop this or drink this and you'll get through it. And then, until, even in my case, suddenly I'm in rehab for drugs and alcohol going, oh, okay, this is where this road ends, and I'm lucky because I got out of it and found a path through that. But it is, look, the music business is for the wanted and the unwanted. It really is, right? People who are just unfit for society. I mean, how many drummers have you asked, what would you be doing if you weren't playing drums? Oh, I'd probably be in jail. You know what I mean? It's kind of the, if I'm not beating on drums, I'd be beating on someone else and I'd be in jail. You know what I mean? And we make light of it, but there's a tone of seriousness about it, that it's like, this is kind of it's a gift that we've been given. We all have a hard time fitting inside of our skin and being human, because we're doing kind of a superhuman experience here, with this whole thing. And then you like me and Burton land in Hollywood and go, oh my God, so these are the people we got to play with. These are the rules, this is it.
Wait, there's rules.
Yeah, the rules are, there are no rules, but these are the gatekeepers. And in order to get in, you got to go through the gatekeepers, because every industry has gatekeepers.
That's true.
And then here we are years later on a podcast talking about it.
And you guys were both so young at that time. You didn't have all the equipment you have now and the wisdom. In fact, if you guys can go back to 1997 and impart your wisdom to young me, I'd really appreciate it, because I needed to hear all this stuff back then. Like, don't be afraid to fail. Watch out. Don't ignore red flags. Like, these are good things. But I want to wrap up my thought, and then we'll look towards the exit, because we've been talking a little while. But this is about mental health. This is about protecting mental health. And yeah, I've been in an abusive relationship. That is a severe hit to mental health. So I want to make sure, I want to give musicians some hope. Like, if you're out there on a tour bus in the middle of a tour, like you were saying, David, where you're like, this is my whole identity, this is my life, this band. But these guys, there's violence in the band, literal violence and emotional, like, I'm feeling horrible. Like, this is such a huge hit to mental health. I'm finally getting to my point. How do people cope with that? That's kind of the main message I want to impart from you guys who've lived it. How do you
for me, look, I got
it?
sober, because an addiction lives in the mind. That's where it lives. With the symptoms are the bottles and the needles and the straws and the powder. Those are just the symptoms. Those aren't the problem. Those are the symptoms, right? The problem centers in the mind. If you're an addict, like I am,
escapism.
So that's where you deal with it, and 12-step programs use a spiritual approach to fix it, which is holistic, because it makes you whole, mind, body, spirit. So I'm an advocate certainly of that, for treatment of that. Mental health has become kind of a broad stroke to things that aren't that broad. They're a bit more specific. It's like, yeah, you're in this dynamic because there's a payoff for you. That's why you're in it. There's a payoff. It's not their fault. It's you. You are the reason that you're here. And that's why I said, you can always quit. I need the money. Well, okay, but is it worth the abuse? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And you know what I mean?
Sometimes it's not.
And sometimes it's not. And sometimes we have to be kicked out of things before we get thrown out of things, right? And that's happened to me on both sides. I've walked away from things, I've been thrown out of things, whatever, you know what I mean? And then you move on. So, to just say, oh, it's mental health, it may be true. And I know the modalities for healing mental health usually come from within versus dealing with addictions. The treatments come from without, higher power, sort of that sort of a, looking to a source outside of yourself for that. So there's kind of two different treatment modalities for that as well. And look, if you have a problem, just pick up the phone or talk to somebody to get help. And that's the hardest thing to do, is that first step. And I had to get caught. My girlfriend had to find my dope and call my parents and call my manager. And suddenly, guess what? David's a drug addict. He's got to go to rehab. You know what I mean? So, who wants that to go away? Because that is your drugs and your alcohol become your best friend when you're an addict, And if you're and chances are, if you're in that world, everything around you supports that, you know, a lot of your relationships sort of co-sign that. So sometimes it all has to go, you know, and that's why for, you know, my group in the 90s, we all had to turn that corner together. We all had to be clean. We had some nice examples in front of us. Motley Crue had done it. Aerosmith had done it. You know, it was a turning of the tides. So we weren't the inventors of it. There were some mentors ahead of us that go, well, shit, they got clean, and look at that. They went straight to number one, you know? And so that was a great inspiration, you know, for that. So I think sometimes having some mentorship as well, you know, all these things are helpful. So that's, I guess, kind of my
Yeah,
piece.
personally for me, stepping away from a situation and being able to just reflect on trying to reflect and realize who I was or who I've been my entire life, and just kind of embrace this person, and but to step away and just really take a breather and just to see everything in the big picture. It could take weeks, it could take months, but it's necessary. You know, you have to learn to, as you said, it comes from within. You have to love yourself first. And if you can't love yourself, you're not going to love anything else. So you're just going to be cynical and just a complete a-hole to most people. You just have to really come to terms with who you are. And if you're comfortable with that, then you can be comfortable with moving on with your life. And it's like, okay, sure, I like to have beer, but I don't, you know, I like to have some drinks, but I don't have to have it every day. You know, I can just, you learn to do things. And it's like a 12-step program. Uh, you know, I don't think I've ever had problems with drugs or alcohol. I've had problems with relationships, that's for sure. And being, you know, the type of person who I wanted to be. But, you know, stepping away helped me realize what I was doing wrong and how I could help myself, because I always tend to blame myself for everything. And I realized that, you know, it's not entirely my fault. So mental health, you know, like Dave said, it's a huge broad spectrum of multiple categories, but it's mostly, it all boils down to how you feel right here and how it affects your mind. And stepping away, meditating, and again, communication, talking to someone who you trust, who, because we've met, you know, I probably am I've always been a person who's been too trusting, and I trust the people that will always wrong me. And I still have that issue, but I'm learning like David later on in life for myself. I'm seeing red flags finally. It's like, what that person's doing right now, that's not really that cool. So, yeah, stepping away for your mental health is also something that has to be done. You have to step away just to reassess.
You know, and you either grow together, you either grow or you go, you know what I mean? And just because a friendship that worked when we were much younger, a business relationship, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work later in life either, you know? And I think that's
That's
one of the
right.
hardest things about sometimes career rock bands. And I've talked to a lot of my friends, as I'm sure you have too, Burton, you know, it's to be in the same group, playing the same songs with the same sort of, because you remember, I was talking to one group that had a record when I was a kid, right? I became friends with them when I worked at PV, and he goes, oh my gosh, we go back and have fights over things we were fighting about in high school, right? That's how long they've been together, right? So, and how could you not, right? You go, you know, it's, and so sometimes, you know, you grow through these things, you move through them, and sometimes you just can't, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's like, you know, that was a relationship, that was a business partnership that worked then in that season of my life, and in this season of my life it just doesn't, you know.
That's right.
And I think also with mature, you ask about what would I say to myself, the younger self, is, you know, don't be afraid, just go for it. It is all gonna work out, you know, and it's all gonna be fine, and no matter how it is, and just keep going, you know, and no matter how it lands, that's God's will, you know what I mean? That's the best, that's the good orderly direction. It's the way it was meant to be, and to come out the other side of it. And you know, just because one thing ends, I had a friend say, you know, when one door closes, another one opens. Sometimes it just sucks being out in the hallway for a little while, you know, because you just don't know, which door is going to open next. And we've all been there, right? And
Yes, we have.
we've all been there. And it's just sometimes sitting in the hall going, all right, this is kind of cold and lonely and dark, but another door always opens, and it's
it might not be the door you expected either.
It isn't. It usually isn't, and it's usually a better door than we would have ever seen coming. You know what I mean? And it's
exactly. Like you said, it's like if I could go back to 1990, would I make different choices? I'm like, maybe, but if it weren't for the choices I made, I wouldn't be where I am right now.
Yeah, that's what
and I actually love where I am right now.
Me
so
too.
why would I change that? I mean, the only thing I would change is I probably would copyright my vocal style. That was it.
But, yeah, because it's everywhere now. Yes.
But other than that, I don't think you can copyright that. But
no.
It was more of a joke. But other than that, no. Do I have regrets? Yes. As Frank Sinatra said, I got a few.
Anybody says no regrets, I mean, come on. That's part of life. You know what I mean? Is I wish I would have, could have, should have. You know what I mean? But those are also trap words. The you better, you ought to, you should have. Those are very dangerous words to move.
That's
forward.
the little devil on your shoulder talking shit to you.
Yeah. It's to not feel shameful about it. Just go, well, that was part of the learning experience. Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted.
Exactly.
And that experience is usually our best teacher. It's the only thing we take to the grave.
Absolutely.
So there's
and
really no rewriting the story. It is what it is.
And David, you have more experience than I do, but I have some experience, and it's the experiences that make us grow, and it's the experiences that make us who we are today. Because your knowledge that you're imparting to everyone right now is information you've gathered since you were 12 years old.
So and helped write a few songs too, so it wasn't all bad.
Yeah, it wasn't all bad. I think I've put out some cool stuff for the world to hear, and to me that's a positive experience. That's something that it's like, wow, people come back to you and like, well, thank you for that. I'm like, you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have both literally made the world a better place through your art. I mean, what a great story to tell, what a great legacy. And like Douglas Adams has the quote, I'm going to botch it. He says, "You live and you learn, or at least you live." Like maybe you learn along the way, but that's what it's all about. So you guys, I applaud you guys for redefining yourselves and still kicking ass in 2025. Let's take it out with telling people what you guys have going on in 2025 and beyond. Let's take it out. By the way, thank you so much for being here. But tell us what you guys have coming up in 2025 and beyond.
Take it, Bird.
Well, thank you for having me here on this your Slam show, Jack. I really appreciate it, and great to see you again, David. Last time I saw you was at NAMM, and that was a great experience at your corner shop there that you had.
Yeah.
2025, I got a couple new singles coming out. My next single is being dropped on May 30th. It's called Savages. It's dropping right before my first Australian tour, my first solo tour. Just going out as Burton C and band. My band needs to have a band name, I think. Like, I don't know, Burton C and the Droids or something. I don't know. But this, like David said, you close one door and you have to wait for another door to open. So this Australian door is opening for me. This tour is opening, but no other doors have opened yet after that. But I think this Australian tour is going to be a proving ground for me and I have a feeling that people are waiting to see what happens before they are jumping on the Burton train and seeing what's happening. But I got new music coming out. My band and I are writing new music. Hopefully, we're looking to put an album out, but we don't have any label interest at this point. But right now, we've just been dropping singles independently, and that's so far it's gonna be 4 singles by the end of June, and that'll be okay.
Well, I'm sorry, Burton, but you and I talked in January briefly about this. But tell everyone watching now, what kind of music can we get? Because you've had a couple different things in your career. What kind of music is the new Burton C. Bell music going to be?
Well, I've decided, it took stepping back and reflecting on what I wanted to do after I left Fear Factory. And it took me a while to understand where I wanted to go. And I looked at every group I've been a part of and every project I've been a part of. And like, I love this, I love this, I love this. And for me, I'm creating an amalgamation of everything I've ever done. So my mantra is heavy, groovy, dark, and moody. And if it fits into those categories, I'm doing it. And heavy says it all right there, but groovy can be up tempo, it can be down tempo. Dark, I love it. And moody, it's that's the goth in me. What can I do? But it's gonna be heavy. And my next single, my first single was Anti-Droid, which is it was written by a producer named Alex Crescione. And then the second single was called Techno Exorcism, which is a song I wrote. And I did it with Big Paul Ferguson on drums from Killing Joke and Norman Westberg on guitar from Swans. And that was really cool. But the next song is Savages, and it's me and my band working together since we've all been working together for about a year now. So it's coming together. We're molding into a unit. And what's really great about this band is that we are communicating, and we're very open and very transparent. And I am the leader. So they're looking to me for answers. They're looking to me for support. And so I am taking that role. And from everything I've learned over the years, I'm like, okay, this is how I want to run my show. So,
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Burton. Yeah, great. And thanks again for being here. Fantastic.
My
Great
pleasure.
insights.
How about you, David?
Yeah, Burton, that was great, man. It's funny. I go back to when we first sort of rallied around this. I think it was 1995. Flotsam and Jetsam, the brand new band Fear Factory, the brand new band Korn, and Megadeth, and we went out around the country, and
that was a fantastic tour, by the way.
It was amazing, man. I mean, we turned heads. We basically, especially you and Korn, changed culture. It was awesome, man. So.
In some ways, Korn more so than others, but
that's what is that 30 years? That
was 95. That was 30 years ago.
Yep. So it's
we watched them blow up on that tour too.
Yeah, right. I mean, and so did you guys. I mean, Fear Factory was a new band, a new sound. And us and Flotsam were kind of the old guard, ushering in the new guard with you guys and Korn, and so yeah, it's been great to see that we've not only survived but we've thrived. And it's kind of like what you said about your band. It has to kind of check the boxes. And it's funny, I do the same thing. I when I go out as I just did the David Ellefson Bass Warrior tour, which is kind of an annual thing I do in Europe, and it's my name on the door. I'm the star of the show, but I think about, okay, how would I like my band to be run based on how I've been in bands myself? How do I want, treat these guys how I would like to be treated? So it is
absolutely.
It's a great example of how to pass it on, pass the torch,
yes,
be kind of walk the talk, and then
exactly.
I've got Kings of Thrash, which checks my thrash metal box. Me and Jeff Scott Soto have a new record coming out here this year, and that's I think just kind of a great hard rock metal amalgamation, and so that's
killer.
To partner with him. We have Montrose. We're firing up again. Keith St. John, who has been given basically the keys to that kingdom from the Montrose legacy. So it's me, him, Jimmy DeGrasso, who got me the gig, and John Levin from Dokken.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, so that'll check my classic rock box. And this is kind of the first that's ever been talked about. I say it because some shows are put on sale and being advertised right now. So I guess I'm sort of tipping my hand to that. On that, Dieth, we're writing a new record. We've got shows. We were headlining a festival in Poland. We're on another festival in Toronto. That'll be next month. Toronto, August 1st. Let me see what else. The Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp I got invited into with Alice Cooper and Rob Halford here in Phoenix. In fact, they just hit me it's sold out, so they're adding the weekend before now. So now it's going to be like
That's
2
awesome.
weekends of yeah. So that's super great, and so that's really kind of cool right here in my own backyard. So yeah, so all of that, and you know, a bunch of tour dates. DavidEllefson.com. You know, from there you can get to all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, all the stuff, and tour dates.
All the socials. God, I hate them so much.
I know. It's just, you know, they're just a billboard for me. You know what I mean? It's just an advertising thing, and but you know, so that's the world we live in, I guess. But yeah, listen, it's a blessed life, and you know, probably like you, Burton. You know, I was in one group for many years, helped build something, you know, really cool that I'm very proud of, and since that, you know, the last 4 years, you know, now going on 5 years is really been a wonderful, it's been just colorful, you know, to me. You know, some people live in the black and the white. I'm living in the colors in between. You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. You know, it's super colorful in between the black and the white. So
yes, it is.
It's a great life. I feel like I've fallen upward into a really, really great, you know, musical endeavor. You know,
I'm very happy for you, David.
Thank you.
It's good to see you working, man.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it.
Life after death, I call it. You know. So there we go.
That's true.
Yes.
That is very true.
All right. Well, I applaud both you guys, your great careers, your legacies, and your future, man. And thank you so much for helping people. Hopefully, some more viewers will get some benefit out of this. Not hopefully, I know people will. So thank you. You guys are welcome back anytime. Thank you for watching. Thanks, everyone. Cool. Giant fingers coming in.
Thank you, Jack. Bye, David.
Bye. See you, Burton. See you, Jack.